Hey everybody. So tonight we're going to spend a little time. This is Prospector Jess from sourdoughminer.com. Check the link down below. Check out what we have on that blog or huntingforgold.com. So tonight's subject is going to be interesting. We had a lot of demand last night, so here it goes. Placer gold traps and potholes. Not the kind you find in the road. Those are caused by, well, we won't get into financial dilemmas of our local communities, but you understand that one. So the one we want to understand is a little bit more scientifically interesting. So what it amounts to is a place where gold can trap out or not. That's the key question, because potholes present a predicament. That is, they may or may not trap gold. So let's talk a little bit about that. So when we're looking at gold prospecting, one of the things you can see in this picture is that's my son down there at the bottom of our dredge hole. And what we're working our way into is bedrock, and down on that bedrock you're going to find places where there are potholes. Those potholes can be extremely valuable in terms of places that gold hides out, forming a pocket placer. Or not, depending upon how the pothole has formed and how mature it is. But one of the other things that you want to look at down there is cracks. We talked about that a couple nights ago. So just keep that in mind, that cracks and potholes kind of connect, as do faults. But we haven't talked about that one yet. So let's check and see if we're online with our audio going full strength. Let's check out and see if we're live. Placer gold traps, bedrock from last night. Refresh the screen. And pull a rabbit out of my hat. Nah, that's a bullwinkle. That's a little inside joke. So here we are, placer gold traps and bedrocks. 7 comments already. It is Friday. This is Gold Rush Day for some of you. Good evening, Jess. The snow is back, says Charles Hanson. Ouch. They have had a big pummeling of snow. I saw Denver. I had a friend over there who lives just on the east side of Denver, and he said it was horrible. They went from like 80 degrees to 16 overnight, and blizzard conditions. Boom. Summer, blizzard. It's going to be tough. So, loud and clear. We got all of our good stuff, says Justin from... And he's chiming in, and Bob Sheasley from North Carolina. So welcome, Justin and Bob. Charles is there. Keith Buck Roberts. Hey, good to see you guys on Friday, no less. I'm going to turn down my volume on my little thing here, but I will monitor you guys. I got a couple of gemstones last night. So we talked a little bit last night about this potholes and bedrock. We also talked a little bit about the potential of doing some on-site training, and I want to keep that one going, so keep comments below on more things of what you'd want to see in on-site training. Subjects, materials, tools, what is it you're looking for? So now let's go. There's a question that came up here. It's an interesting one. We'll talk about it later. Joe Kerrigan asks, is it possible to create a gold trap in a creek or a river that I can return to and harvest gold deposits? And the answer is yes. It's tricky. And we'll get onto that another time. But yes, it can be done. And technically, that's essentially what you're doing with your sluice box whenever you set it up. So you want to set up a sluice. And we'll leave it at that for right now. Okay, Justin is from Maine. That's right. The main thing. So I am going to park this for right now. I will keep an eye on it. If you guys find that I'm not coming through, just kind of make my phone smoke. And for right now, I want to talk about potholes. So let's take a look. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Tonight's subject is sponsored by Sourdough Miner 2020 report. So check it out. It connects the dots between all of this water flow and the things that cause potholes to happen, as well as other kinds of gold trapping events, as well as the alignments of pay streaks. So check it out. It's sourdoughminer.com 2020. Look it up. We also have the government gold maps thing going on, which would be sourdoughminer.com/ggm for how to find gold near you or map out a specific location right next to you using the USGS database, and some tips from Prospector Jess and how to do that and how to get the most out of it, how to read it. So now let's go back to our subject. So we're talking about this placer gold traps and potholes, and what we want to look at specifically is kind of how I'm banging around here looking for the thing I had. Here we go. So this is a pretty good idea of what a pothole starts to look like when it's young. You can see this, dent forming in this rock material. This is kind of a granitic material, and so it's starting to collect a bunch of deposit down in here. And ideally, if it were working right, it would be collecting gold. But I'll tell you, there's some things in this one that tell me I wouldn't look for it, except perhaps notice this fissure right here, this crack right in here, which continues on over into here. That might present some interesting prospects right there. Other than that, the problem with this particular pothole is it's too young. It's too shallow, and it's in an area, notice the water there in low flow is jetting through pretty strongly. Imagine what it's like when the water is up at this level and shooting across. It's going to be blowing everything out of that hole. And the way you know that is, this is all sands and gravels. It's very light material. So it just settled in there as this flow was coming down below that level. Notice you don't see a whole lot of it up in here, like right on this ledge. And that's because it continued to pop on down as the water started to move down as the flood subsided. So we have to keep in mind flooding and potholes and hydrodynamics and the effects of grinding action, because that's what forms a pothole. And that whole thing comes into play. Let me draw a little bit on the blackboard, give you kind of an idea of what's going on here. So when we have a bedrock interface, which I'm going to color in, I don't know what color, pick a color. How about red? So we have our bedrock, and it kind of comes along and forms this kind of ripply interface. And maybe here it has a crack. And maybe up somewhere up here is a great big boulder on a cliff. I'm making this up as I go. I have scripts for these things. So this great big boulder dislodges in a flood or during winter season when there's a lot of ice, and it comes down with all the power of gravity and smacks right there next to this crack. Now what do you think's going to happen? Well, more cracks. Okay, and when those more cracks get hit with your water flow, then we have some interesting things start to develop. So now our water comes scooting down this in high flow, just coming through here, right through Prospector Jess's window there, right there. And so as this water shoots by, the dynamics in this area of this crack is going to create some turbulence. That in turn is going to create some more pressure and forces and start dislodging a few of these pieces out of here. And they're going to fly downstream. So let's paint them with red. Maybe a slightly different color red, purpley. So now these pieces start coming out, pop, pop, because of the churning motion and because of some of the other gravels that are on the surface here that are pounding into this area. And potentially this boulder stayed there, but it doesn't have to. It just has to damage the surface of this bedrock. So what's happening now is this thing's starting to scoop out. As these chips occur, more and more water power. We've talked about this before. As the hydrodynamics start occurring, the more of the distortion in the surface, the more likely we're going to get some really interesting turbulent flow. I drew that as a big messy curlicue. Looks kind of like a sluice box, but not. And at this stage, because it's young, anything in the bottom of here, any material that shows up on the bottom, including gold, will likely end up, depositing here, and then pop, downstream it goes, because this thing is just churning, kind of like a grinder in circular motion, actually almost a sphere of violent action. The only time, so that's a young pothole, okay? As that pothole ages, I'm going to draw it again. Clear the whiteboard. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at an old pothole. Now, that's an interesting derogatory statement. Okay, you old pothole. Here we go. And so remember, it cracked right in here and started scooping out material. And because maybe it ran into some softer layers here, there's some layers in here that are softer bedrock. You know, this whole thing is bedrock, remember? But it doesn't have to be uniform, and typically isn't. They call it non-homogeneous. So it can have layers of material, some of which is fairly lightweight, or a spot could be lightweight even. That can cause a pothole to start. But what's happening here is as this pothole is aging, it's getting deeper and more rounded. As it does, now some interesting stuff starts happening. A few larger cobbles and maybe a couple little boulder sized things and some sands and gravel start packing in here. And pretty soon it's kind of all filled in across this top. Now, when it does that, our friend the water comes shooting down this chute, if you will, and it might see a little bit of turbulence here, but not anything like what was happening before. There's no more violent action, except maybe a little vibration up and down this stack right here. And that vibration will have an interesting property that you want to take advantage of if you find one of these things. Because any gold that floats across the surface of that will tend to deposit in the kind of beginning edges of it, and get vibration will just basically cause that gold to sink to the bottom and concentrate right in this area down here, out of every flow that goes by here for the next few centuries. And so what ends up happening is this right here can be a pocket placer worth a fortune. And it's simply because it's there. Now here's the funny part. You saw in that first picture that I showed you, let me see if I got it here. Notice if this whole bottom were filled with gravels, you wouldn't see that there's a pothole. That's a problem. And so if you don't see there's a pothole, you won't know that it's there, and you won't know that it's chock full of gold unless you take a metal detector over it underwater. So what you're going to end up having to do is look at dredging down or plucking the rocks off the bottom and scooping and shoveling into your high banker or your sluice, but you're going to have to go to bedrock to find the holes in the bedrock, unless you already have uncovered them. Now here's the problem. If it's been uncovered and it's exposed, chances are pretty good every miner and his mother's uncle's already looked at it. Never hurts to look again, but just be aware of that. For example, in Columbia, California, it's an area just outside of Sonora, there's a whole area next to the airport there that was limestone that was soft material that got scooped out in just that manner. That limestone was full of gold when the prospectors hit it in 1849, 48, that time frame. And so that became one of the hottest areas on the Sierra Nevada, was just that one little area by the airport, because you could literally dig, have a 4x4 foot prospect claim and dig straight down into that hole and scoop out buckets of gold, and you're done. Your career's over. You made it. But that's a rarity now, because places like that have been covered. That doesn't mean they won't reconcentrate gold in the future, but if they don't have flow going over them, trust me, they don't have flow going over the airport. But if you have flow going over them, they can reconcentrate. They just won't have the concentrations that they've had over thousands of years. So that's just something to be aware of. If it's visible, it's likely to be picked over. Try it anyway. Never hurts. Dig all targets. So now let's go back to that blackboard. So what we have, as we pointed out, is that situation where the gold is at the bottom of that pothole. Now let's take a look at the different kinds of geometries of potholes. So first one is a young pothole, and it just basically is a dimple or a swale in the surface that starts digging into this surface like that. Then as it matures, it starts to scoop out a little more and go a little deeper. Okay, and then a fully mature pothole is going to be something that looks like this. And here's what's funny, because it has the ability to kind of continue to grind over the years in heavy flows, it can actually form a little pocket, a little purse. And that kind of placer, prospect is quite interesting and can be found far away from the current water flow. That's the case in the Sonora, Columbia area. It's also the case on many high bench placers. You have to remember, high bench placers were old river bottoms. Old river bottoms can have bedrock underneath them that has this property. So you want to be looking out for anything that looks like a distortion in the bedrock surface and a pocket inside that could easily be concentrating gold. The deal that I wanted to point out that came up last night was, well, will it always concentrate gold? Not usually here. Too much flowing through. Might be here. Depends on how stable the material in the bottom is and whether it concretes. That's another thing that can happen, is this stuff could get covered over with calcite and essentially form a false bedrock and lock in any gold that's in there. That's a good deal. But it's going to take you digging into that material relative to the bedrock to get it out. This kind is a very interesting prospect, and I would go and look down inside of this thing every time. And especially if you see any kinds of cracks or fissures in the bottom of this thing, you got to do that thing I talked about last night, where you're scooping in and looking with a crevicing tool and some tweezers. And some people were asking me, do you jet them out with a hose? Well, I use like a fire hose kind of attachment to my output of my dredge pump, and that gives me enough velocity to scoop that stuff out without blowing it to bits. The question was asked whether or not you would use like a high pressure, like a 2000 psi, pressure washer, and you could, but the problem with doing anything like that is, only the largest chunks of gold could resist that. Anything smaller is going to go flying for yards, and once it starts in motion, remember, it's got high density, it's going to go quite a distance unless you've got the area covered with fluid. Like if it's buried at the bottom of the stream, that might be an interesting possibility, especially if these cracks are fine and you can somehow get the material out of there. But remember, every time you agitate up or you get smaller gold and you hit it with a pressure stream that strong, it runs a chance of distorting or destroying smaller specimen gold. Like if there are crystalline gold pieces in there or anything like that, it's going to split them up. It might cause damage to the surface, things like that. So keep that in mind. Every time you work, you want to be able to adapt and know why. The why you worry about that is gold is very malleable, especially if it's pure. If you're heading toward 24 karat, you got to watch out. The stuff will dent with the slightest tap of your hammer. And if you dent the wrong piece, like if it's a good piece of crystalline and you break off a piece of that, you might cut its value to a specimen collector in two. You just want to be careful about that when you're digging and prospecting. So this is kind of the picture of placer gold traps and potholes and how they form over time. The hydrodynamics that goes into them has to do with fluid flow and boundary conditions. And what will typically happen is, as they get deep enough, this one in particular, as it gets very deep, it creates a condition that essentially says, without being able to enter here and any kind of material building up in the bottom of this, the fluid will tend to want to do this kind of thing. It'll tend to dip over it. Whereas this one, it may actually cause a little eddy in it. It causes some of the material to be chucked out. The difference between those two flows is enormous in terms of what it'll do for concentrating gold and sort of slowing the depth of the pothole's growth. This one up here, like I said, if it's a boulder that hit it, that's one thing. If it's like that one in that other picture, it's probably not so much a boulder as it is just a weakness in the rock where that crack was. This picture, I don't want to go away from this because it erases the board, but that one I have earlier that shows the crack and the gravels in it, that kind of situation, because it's so shallow, will almost always cause everything in it to get scooped out. It's just traveling through and looks like a polished surface, so out it goes. It could concentrate in a crack, but that's the condition I'd be looking for under those conditions. And so that's it for tonight. I just wanted to touch on placer gold and potholes. not the road kind. See, we got people asking about Vermont. I got communication going on. Great. Justin Sanders says he just got a Gold Hog Raptor Flare 2.0 high banker last year. Going to use it and as a dredge this year. So good. Great. And that's the kind of thing you want to have. In many cases, my recommendation, like I've always said, is, you know, start with a, oh man, my gold pan's full of electrical stuff. What's that about? But start with a pan, okay, and then work your way up to more expensive and extensive material. Pan, then a sluice box, actually a pan and a classifier, a pan, classifier, and a sluice box, and a bucket, and so forth, before you move into high banker dredge material. And I go into the high bankers in the 2 to 3 inch range, simply because, and that depends on how much material you have and how much you have in your budget. Don't crush your budget. It's like people who buy ginormous barbecues. Why would you do that? Especially if they're made out of crummy stuff. So they buy a ginormous barbecue that's supposed to be a look-alike, and it wears out in 2 years. Same thing's true with dredges and high bankers. Buy good equipment and good material, but buy it on the size you need, not the size you want or that they sold you on. And that's an important tip from Prospector Jess. Don't forget it. It's easy. It's like, you know, buying a car. Don't go down, or actually it's like buying food. Don't go in there hungry. If you go in there hungry looking for a high banker, you're going to buy one, even though you don't need one. Go in there with a list of what you actually need, and then go get those things. Open your eyes to the other stuff and wait overnight. Okay, so that's it for tonight. Prospector Jess, have a great weekend, guys. Good Friday, and I'll see you tomorrow. Like I said, check out Government Gold Maps. Check out our 2020 thing here. We have that going on. The Government Gold Maps is GGM, where it says 20-20. So both of those are still available, and you just get them by going check out the offer. We did kind of make a few changes to the offer, clarifying what GGM is about and how you can, you know, benefit from it. So you might want to take a look at the offer and tell us what you think. And if you have any questions, let us know. Comment below or send me a message. Prospector Jess, overnight. Good night. Overnight. Good night and good prospecting. We'll see you tomorrow.